Hi, I'm Ben Ferguson, and it is caucus time in Utah. And joining me to talk about a very big race is Tim Aalders. Tim, I appreciate you sitting down with me to talk about this, and it's going to be a very exciting race here for you coming up.
And I appreciate you having me here because there's a lot of important things that need to be discussed, and you're one of the few people out here that are letting us have these conversations in media today.
And you've decided to do the insane thing I always say to people running for office, and that is to actually run for office. I got to ask you, Tim, why on earth did you decide that this was a good idea right now?
You know, the world's just getting more and more vitriol. There's more and more anger and hatred, and it all resonates from Washington, D.C. Washington wants us fighting with each other. They don't want to have adult conversation, and they don't want to do their job. So as a talk radio host for years, we talk about all these issues. We talk about how to make change, and we complain about Washington, D.C. Everybody complains about Washington, D.C. The water cooler, their couch, they're all talking about it, but we never change our behavior. And I'm looking around at the scope of who's in Washington, D.C., what's happening in Washington, D.C., and if we don't change, it's our children and our grandchildren who are going to pay the price. So me and my wife talked about it, and we tried last time against my opponent, and it was
You got a supportive wife if she's letting you go for it again. I can promise you that.
Yeah, and it was a COVID year, and I went and met the candidates, and they're good people, passionate people, but they didn't have the resources, they don't have the knowledge of Washington, D.C., and I just can't stand one more entrenched politician going back to Washington to do the same thing over and over.
Tim, there's one interesting thing I think about your race, and that is who you're going up against, the incumbent. I was genuinely shocked when I was doing research at his history politically. This is a guy that is, I would say, barely a moderate, really made a living in politics being a Democrat, saw an opportunity to go to Congress after being a Democrat elected mayor in Provost. And he decided, look, I want to go to D.C. I have to become a Republican to have a shot at this seat. And I think it's amazing that a lot of people didn't notice that transformation. But if you look at what he's actually doing in Washington right now, it's very clear his roots are in the Democratic Party. And many of the things that he's done, and we'll talk about that in a moment, are clearly points and talking points in the Democratic Party. Is that part of the reason why you decided to run and challenge him?
Yes, it's getting more easy for people in Utah, politicians in Utah, to switch affiliation right around election time. And, unfortunately, the people who vote don't do research. So they just believe the 30-second soundbite on TV. But when you really get back into the history, once a Democrat, always a Democrat, people will say, well, look, Reagan switched. He's no Reagan. He's no Reagan. He's no Democrat from the JFK era. He is a Democrat from the progressive, more liberal side, and he takes those views to Washington in the Republican Party.
You mentioned Reagan, and Reagan truly had a transformation when he became a Republican. I would even say a guy like Donald Trump, who was actually a Democrat early on, truly had a real transformation to Republican. But if you look at what he has done even recently, this is a guy just a couple years ago that had a campaign ad out there that said build the wall, and then he saw that his campaign was doing this and said take it down, right? Don't build the wall, don't even advertise the wall. But now he's gone to the complete opposite side on this issue recently and actually co-sponsored legislation to allow for amnesty for millions of people that came into this country illegally. I go back to the shock factor. I think a lot of people, if they realize he was one of the co-authors of this legislation, they may have no idea this is what he's doing in D.C. so many miles away.
The first time I ran against John Curtis, he just, voted for a bill that allowed 1.8 million. And people were like, yeah, he's voting for it. He didn't sponsor it. Well, this time he actually sponsored it.
Yeah.
2.7, amnesty across the board.
And sponsoring a bill, I think we need to be clear about this. It means it's not just you're walking in there and pushing a red button or a green button, right? I mean, you truly believe in this legislation. You want to author it. You want to be a part of it. And you want to hang it on the wall as one of your accomplishments as a congressman.
Yeah, you tie your name to it. You're like saying, I'm one of the people who created this. I'm not just reading it and voting on it. I created this. This is my brainstorm, part of my idea to allow people who have violated U.S. law just get a free pass. And for most Republicans across the country, at least more conservative, almost any Republican across the country, we believe in the rule of law. And if you believe in the rule of law, we shouldn't have people in Washington violating the law through legislation.
I think politics are all local. And there's one thing that I know, and you know this, the energy sector is extremely important to people that live in Utah. And it's extremely important to many fathers and husbands and wives and sons and daughters. It's how they make their living. And when you hear that you have a congressman who's out there actually saying, let's go ahead and undercut these men and women who are trying to survive now in an industry that's already under attack from the Biden administration, this seems like the wrong time to do this. I mean, even if you did believe this, this is actually making it worse for the average person living in Utah.
You know, the founding principles of our nation was we were supposed to be self-sufficient. Energy, manufacturing, food, we're supposed to be able to take care of ourselves, because if conflict ever breaks out and our enemies supply everything we need to survive, it's just not a good idea. And Utah is the 11th largest state in the nation on gas and oil. Yet here we have natural gas, and here we have our congressman making a climate caucus, and he is totally opposed to what powers our nation and powers the world at this moment in time.
I don't want to just run quickly past what you just mentioned, because I think it's a massive issue and an issue that he's proud of. So let's just talk about this climate caucus that he helped create and is certainly a leader of it. This is a caucus put together to actually deal with the issues of climate change and to push for many parts of the Green New Deal.
Yeah, you know, and the Republicans who signed on to this will try and put the spin on it. You know, we really
There weren't many, let's be clear. There weren't a whole lot of Republicans clamoring to be on the climate caucus.
No, but there were a few. The more Democratic-leaning congresspeople in Washington, D.C., you know, they look at it as a chance to win the more moderate or liberal vote. They want to make people happy, not do what's right. They want to make people happy. And no matter how you spin it, we're not ready in the world for a lot of the changes AOC and the Democrats in Washington want to force down our throat.
Yeah, you just look at Ukraine right now, and you look at the fact that we are sending money to people and doing backroom deals in Venezuela. We're doing backroom deals, apparently even trying to figure out what our foreign policy is because we're afraid of losing energy from Russia. You look at Europe right now, they're beholden to Russia and what he's doing, what are clearly, you know, war crimes against innocent people in Ukraine. And it all goes back to me to look at where we were just a little over a year ago. You had the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump at the time, who made sure that we were not beholden to these people, that we weren't enriching them. And a climate caucus, all it does is play into the hands of Vladimir Putin. Am I wrong?
No, it plays in the hand of the whole UN and the global world, one world government. And we can't play into that. We didn't want entanglements in this nation, because once you're entangled, you can't be that shining city on the hill that Reagan talked about, where the people in the world look at it and say, hey, we want to copy that nation. We want the freedom that America has. No, we are slaves to the world because our president believes we shouldn't be self-sufficient in anything. And now we have Republicans going along with it.
I want to switch gears to something else that is, I think, really important to a lot of people right now, and that's the economy. We're seeing inflation numbers that for my lifetime we've never seen. I'm paying a gas price at the pump right now, no matter where I travel, that is the most I've ever paid in my lifetime. And we have Americans that are genuinely suffering. We are seeing hyperinflation. We are seeing interest rates that are going up. And we're seeing a lot of people that had gains under the last administration, their 401k and their retirements, that were wiped out in a matter of a couple months. Yet, the man that you're trying to unseat is really good, apparently, at making money. Really good at making money during these hard times. He made more money, and we're talking about percentage gains in Washington, then he was in the top 5. I think he was number 4 of the people that figured out how to make the most money during this time of COVID. Is that really what a congressman should be doing, is actually enriching himself and his family instead of looking out for the people who back home are suffering and hurting from the lockdowns and everything else that we witnessed?
You know, if you want to be a stock trader, be a stock trader. You know, go to New York and just become a stock trader. When you're our congressperson, you're supposed to be protecting the people of Utah, the people in your district, and the country. You're not supposed to be monetizing the position and making sure that you have a good retirement home in Utah eventually. You're supposed to be making the decisions that
He's got more than a nice retirement home in Utah, let's be clear. I mean, this guy's built a mansion recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive home. It's a big, it's something that even I can't build.
And I'm okay with success. I want to make that clear. I have no problem with success. I have a problem when your success is coming at the expense of the American people that sent you to Washington that you're supposed to be representing. And I think that's the part that the problem that so many, I think, voters are going to have an issue with, if they actually understood. I mean, this guy's making more money than a guy like Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden, I would say, would be jealous of the gains that he is making in Congress. And you've got people in Congress that have been there a lot longer than he have, and they haven't even figured out how to exploit their title to have the returns that this man had in a very short period of time.
You know, one of the questions we have to ask is, how did they get it? How do they know? Well, they're betting on stocks that they directly influence with government contracts. It would be illegal in the private sector. Like you,
You would go to jail.
Yeah, I could care less if people make good money. If they start a business, they're industrious and they become wealthy and they've earned it. But when you go and buy stocks and vote on contracts that go to those companies to inflate your stocks, the American people, the people of Utah, should be outraged.
There's no difference in what he did, to be clear, than what Nancy Pelosi did. They're exactly the same when it comes to their earnings reports. I mean, they both exploited their position in office to take advantage of the voters that sent them there for their own personal wealth and their gain, and gains that no one else in the private sector saw during the same time period. That's a fact.
Well, and it's also a fact that he actually did it better than Nancy Pelosi. So he ranks higher on the list than she does. And that's shocking because she's been one of the top profiteers in Washington for decades.
Let's talk a little bit about foreign policy, and it's been such a headline recently with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. I am concerned, certainly, for what's happening with this administration and just how vulnerable they have allowed America to become. And I see these other people seeing the debacle that happened in Afghanistan and seeing that we wouldn't even go 60 feet or 60 yards to save an American citizen in those final days. We were taking orders from the Taliban for more than a month at the very end. And it clearly was a moment where dictators and tyrants, whether it be Putin, whether it be China, they saw an opportunity. And they said, now is our time to go. Now is our time to seize this opportunity of a very weak president. If you go to Congress, how do you see, I guess, your foreign policy view of what's happening right now?
Well, the world sees us as weak. You know, they don't see us as with a Reagan or even a Trump. They see the administration more focused on destroying every American's lives than they do on protecting their troops, protecting their young men and women, and getting involved in the world. Where other presidents in the past would reach out to foreign presidents, foreign leaders, and have conversations, we wait and react. We're not proactive in America anymore because we're too focused on investigating former presidents and things that are happening in this world, and mask mandates and forcing us to still wear masks on planes, than they are worried about Russia going into the Ukraine and killing people. You know, we watched the buildup. We watched everything. We listened to Putin's threats. We took no action until it already happened, and then it was too late. But no member of Congress actually spoke out against how this administration was behaving.
Would you have been in favor of sanctions on Vladimir Putin before he actually invaded? When he said he was going to invade, for example, it's a point where we just seem to be stalled out for no reason. We knew what he was doing. We knew he was amassing the troops on the border, and we knew he was going to invade. And he said when he was going to invade, and even then we didn't do sanctions yet. Should we have done those beforehand and said, get your troops back away from that border? And these sanctions will be here until those troops go back to where they belong in your country.
That's part of being proactive instead of reactive. Putin was testing the administration. He was testing Washington, D.C. Let's see how they react if I start to mass troops on this border. And he says, oh, nobody cares. I can reunify the Soviet bloc because nobody in America cares in charge that I'm doing it. They're not punishing me. They're not threatening to punish me. They're just watching me do it. So why not? You know, we could have said, hey, if you want to seize the Ukraine, we'll seize all your assets in America.
I call it the big three in politics. It's three major issues that some people kind of roll their eyes when they hear these questions because they're like, every politician's going to be on the record for this. But I think it's important. So I'm going to ask you the big three, and I want to know what your position is and why. Let's start first with abortion.
I'm pro-life. It's amazing to me that people go out there, act irresponsibly for the most part, and then don't want to have consequences to their actions. So we can just get rid of this child and nobody's worse off. It's interesting how they flip the narrative to my body, my choice to I want everybody to wear a mask. I want everybody to get injected. I want everybody to do everything. But yet they won't protect the one life that they're totally responsible for creating. They'll just get rid of it because it's an inconvenient time for them.
I'm going to ask a bonus question in there because apparently the question I'm about to ask you is a really tough one we just learned. Do you know how to define a woman?
You don't need to be an old cowboy to tell a steer from a cow.
There you go.
Simple answer.
Hey, maybe you're ready for the Supreme Court if you can pull that one off, right?
Yeah, I should get a Nobel Prize for biology.
Yeah, well, you got to be a biologist apparently to have an opinion nowadays.
One that matters, I guess.
That's true. Military. Do you want to see a large military? Do you believe it's a deterrent? Or do you say save money and pull back?
We always need a strong military. We live in a world today where we have the Putins out there. We have the people in the Middle East. We have China, building up their military. Why is everybody building up instead of getting rid of weapons that can kill humanity? I think we should be past the point where we want to conquer other countries for land, but we're not. And as long as we're not, then America needs a strong military, because what's the most richest, most prized possession out there in the world today? It's still America. So if they could have their way and build up and surpass America, then we are no longer influential in the world at all.
Donald Trump, maybe one of the most polarizing figures in American political modern history. There are a lot of political minds out there that think in these elections coming up that conservatives, Republican candidates should distance themselves from Donald Trump. Do you like the former president?
I actually enjoyed watching the former president, and I'll tell you why. He was totally anti-establishment. Republicans couldn't control him. Democrats couldn't control him. Special interests didn't control him. It was unpredictable. You never know what Donald was going to say, and you never knew what he was going to do. But everything he said he would do, he tried. And that's the most important thing in Washington, D.C. when you're elected. Honor the campaign promises you make, whether you're successful or not because of the other members in Congress, the Senate, could stop a president. Whether or not you attempted to do what you told the American people you'd do. Most people vilified the president because mainstream media did. I have never seen in my lifetime the media make the world vote against someone instead of for something.
When you see people like the president getting banned from social media the way they were, and you see the social media ban stories that we now know are true, like the Hunter Biden laptop story, it took him 17 months to admit that it was true and an accurate story and it was authentic and it wasn't Russian disinformation, even though you had people like John Brennan, James Clapper, and Hillary Clinton say it was disinformation from Russia to try to influence the election. It was all true. It was real. It wasn't part of Russia. It was not a Russia hoax or any of that crap that they said. And I say that to be blunt because I think it literally could have changed the outcome of the election. Do you believe it's time for us, especially if you go to Congress, to rein in big tech and the power they have to silence not just individuals, but media stories that are clearly authentic and legitimate?
When I grew up, Ma Bell was the big thing. It was the only thing. And government got involved and broke that down. Now we have T-Mobile, we have AT&T, we have options, we have selections on the free market like we're supposed to. Government has watched 5 of the largest corporations and richest people in the world conglomerate everything we hear, put it in a monopoly. If government don't break it up, they're not going to willingly break it up themselves. But they're not doing it for true news anymore. They're doing it to influence the minds of the people in this country, to make us hate each other, to make us hate good ideas, to where we can't even have a logical conversation, an adult conversation, because they say it's incorrect and improper. It's amazing how they will allow Democratic congresspeople to go on and say, go ahead and attack the police. We need to get rid of the police. Yet our president gets on there and says, let's peacefully and respectfully march down and show the people that we want election integrity. And they turn it into something totally different.
When you look at the future for you and your campaign, there's going to be people that are going to say, look, we got a guy there that we know. He hasn't done anything really that bad. He's got the money, and they're going to probably try to say, you don't. Do you have what it takes to actually challenge an incumbent financially? Because unfortunately, elections are won and lost when you spend cash. And I know that there are going to be people that are going to say, well, does he even have a chance? Should I risk when I write it, if I'm a caucus goer, should I risk saying yes to him? Because maybe I do like his ideas, but can he really get it done if there's an election?
Well, everybody will know on April 14th once the finance comes out. So I'm self-funded, and I'm self-funded pretty equal to where our current congressperson has on his last reporting. And the reason I did it is because his money comes from special interests. His money comes from the people who want to influence the climate caucus, who want to help with the legislation that will allow amnesty to people who violated our laws. Mine comes from me or the people of District 3. So the only person I owe allegiance to is the Constitution of this country and the people of Utah.
If you get elected, will you trade stocks the way that he's been trading stocks, or will you pledge the people that you will not use the insider information to have such a massive personal gain?
I don't trade stocks now. I'm a land investor, land developer. My wife has a 401k through her company that buys like Spectrum across the board. She was hurt like everybody else when you talked about the collapse. But no, I personally won't buy stocks. I'm not going to have somebody from a defense contractor walk in and say, hey, the best thing to do right now is to take a ton of options and buy some stocks without your own money. And we're voting on, a defense contract because we just left all this $80 billion worth of equipment in Afghanistan needs to be replaced. And we want to be that company. So no, I won't buy stocks. And I don't think any congressperson should be able to buy stocks based directly on corporations or contracts that they influence with their vote.
One other thing I think is such an important issue when you look at DC, and that's going to be, you could very well, and I say hopefully, have a divided government come midterm elections. There's a good chance that Republicans could possibly take back the House. When we've done that in the past, we've done a pretty good job, I'm saying, Republicans, of screwing it up. What needs to get done? Do we need to have a balanced budget amendment? Do we need to get back to fiscal responsibility? If you went, what would be your top things that you would say need to get done quickly with other members that you work with in that first 100 days?
One of the things that irritated me most when all the talk on the balanced budget amendment was going on is you need 2/3 of Congress to do an amendment. They had 57 votes. They could have just balanced the budget. They chose not to because nobody wants to balance the budget. I want single issue legislation because the way our government spends money and wastes money is through massive omnibus bills. And Republicans always seem to say, we got to win in this piece of legislation. So we voted for it because we got to win. But we took 40 losses. So in truth, we took 39 steps backwards. Every issue in Washington should be funded on its own merits. We shouldn't allow Congress people to influence their own pocketbooks, to influence their own states, based on just throwing everything in the kitchen sink into a piece of legislation, not giving anybody time to accurately read it and dissect it, and passing those bills. So that is one of the key things we need to do. The second thing we need to do is, if you've ever done business, Americans can't go buy land in China. We can't buy land in Russia. Most of the UK, we can't go buy land there. But every foreign country in the world can come by the necessary, all the resources we need to be self-sufficient in this nation. We need to make it so we can't sell our resources to nations that are supposedly hostile to America. And we need to make sure that we give them a time period to where they need to sell it back. They've done it to us and other countries. It's amazing what we let nations get away with, that we ourselves just give away our farming, we give away our cattle, we give away our oil to nations that have hostile intent, as proven by Russia.
As I've been here in Utah, I've talked to a fair amount of people, and there seems to be a consistent theme, and that is there's a disillusionment, even a disappointment by some of the leaders that are in the Senate and in the House. When you look at that, why do you think that is right now, that so many people seem to be very frustrated or at least irritated with what the leaders are supposed to be doing on their behalf that they're not doing in Washington?
The simple truth is we send the wrong people there. We send people who want to make everyone happy. You know, it's the old go along to get along type thing. And that's the mentality we have in Washington, D.C. Nobody wants to make a hard choice because the odds are if they keep making hard choices, they're not going to be reelected. But Congress isn't a place to retire. It's not where you're supposed to go and serve 30 years. It's not supposed to be a career. It was never meant to be a career. Hard choices have to be made. Hard things need to be discussed, but nobody wants to have those discussions. Nobody wants to make a difficult choice. We need people who are honest, people with integrity, and people who are true conservatives in this nation. And we don't have it. You know, they'll tell you they are, but their actions define them. My father used to always tell me, words are powerful. We've both been on the radio. Words can drop emotions. It can make people really excitable. It can make them just, you know, you can tell people on the radio, hey, I want everybody to show up to the Capitol tomorrow with pitchforks, and there'll be a large crowd there with pitchforks at the Capitol. But it's our actions that define us. All Washington does is talk. They just talk. They talk really well. They spend their whole day going to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They spend the whole time talking about things, but then you look behind their talk and there's no action. Everybody's mentioned single item legislation. Nobody's presented a bill. Everybody said we shouldn't sell off our national resources. Nobody's presented a bill. Everybody talks about changing and fixing immigration. Nobody but our former president wanted to fund a wall. It's like we can talk about everything until we're blue in the face and we're going to bankrupt our children and our grandchildren. Yet the people of this country need to change. If you want integrity in Washington, if you want honesty in Washington, if you want conservative principles in Washington, then we got to stop electing people pleasers and people who want to monetize the job and have a retirement more than they do want to make tough decisions and have tough conversations that are going to make a lot of people angry.
You know, it's amazing how quickly history repeats itself. And you just mentioned two things that I think made Donald Trump become the president. He talked about energy independence. He talked about that Keystone Pipeline. He talked about border security. And he talked about building that wall. And yet it only took 1 year for Joe Biden and his team to basically undo everything that Donald Trump fought so hard for. If you go to Congress, how important is that Keystone Pipeline and energy independence to you? And also, how important is it to go back to the simple and the basic idea of having a border wall to protect and defend our country and make sure that our immigration process is done in the legal and correct way?
You know, the Keystone Pipeline was massive. And as soon as he reversed Trump's allowing that to happen, lots of people lost their job. We lost millions of barrels of oil that we would be making our nation self-sufficient on energy. Yet he didn't want it at the time. You know, the ties to Russia, ties to Ukraine, Venezuela. We'd rather buy it from enemies than get it from our own backyard. It's insane. And it's not just the Keystone Pipeline. We have land here in Utah, the Bears Ear. We have tons of oil and natural gas. And Trump was making it open for companies to lease and utilize. And as soon as Biden took over, he seized back those and made it a national monument again and made it illegal to do it. Now, I just drove through Uintah County, and it's amazing how they've made the oil wells look as part of nature and, you know, less intrusive than at any point in our history. We can still get our energy out of our ground without destroying nature's beauty. They just don't want to do it. They'd rather be dependent on the people who give them money. Now, on the wall.
Or just go out and buy a $70,000 car right now, right? No problem.
Yeah. You know, it's
just go grab your Tesla. It's easy, right?
Yeah, go grab your Tesla that is used. Everything in there is dirty energy, lithium, everything for the batteries. We have no way of disposing of them yet. Yeah, go ahead and get that. Most Americans can't afford it. So it's just insanity. We're not ready for it yet. Half of my district And I know this for a fact because somebody drove a Tesla up to Vernal when I was up there, and there's no place to charge one. So we had a Mickey Mouse.
That's a bad day. That's when you laugh and you see the generator sitting next to the car, charging the car with using gas.
Yeah. All paranoid. And he's like, what am I going to do? I said, I don't know. I drive a gas vehicle.
Yeah.
I'm getting home today, you know. And then you talk about immigration. I've been to the border. I've walked the border with Arizona sheriffs. I've walked it with Jim Gilchrist. I know the issues the farmers and ranchers are having there. You see the garbage, the waste that they leave behind on pristine farmland. You know, you see the damage, the vandalism. You see the images that their cameras from Border Patrol captures of not women, children, people coming across the border, lines, 50, 60, 100 people deep carrying backpacks of drugs. Anybody can get across our border. It's a national security issue.
Well, just fentanyl alone, you look at right now. I mean, it's an epidemic in this country, and it's coming across the border from Mexico, and it's killing women and children and fathers and sons and daughters every day in numbers that we've never seen in this country, and no one seems to be talking about the drugs, the fentanyl that's coming across, and the people that it is killing each and every day. We saw it over spring break headlines where there was 20 and 30 kids that ended up passing out at a party because they thought they were taking one thing. It was laced with fentanyl in Florida recently. I mean, it is a problem that people just are refusing to admit because it's, a body bag here and a body bag here. It's not all in one location. It's just hundreds of thousands around the country, yet we have a wide open border, and that's where the drugs are coming from.
And it's going to get worse. I mean, terrorists can walk across that border. And we just left $80 billion in weaponry. I'm not talking just obsolete weaponry. We left militarized drones. We've left rocket launchers and grenades that can get to Mexico and walk across our border. We are creating our own issues in this country. Simple problems with simple answers they can't have adult conversations about. They don't recognize the good and the bad. Nobody sits down and say, okay, explain why it's a good idea. Because if it's such a great idea, why do you have a fence around your house? It's just insane what America does, what no other nation in the world will allow, but yet the UN can say, well, America needs to have open borders. Don't build the wall. And America says, yeah, it's a bad idea. But no European bloc country just lets immigrants come into their nation.
I want to go back to Congress for a second, and let's talk about Congress from the standpoint of an investigative body. If there's anything I've learned about Congress is if they investigate it, there's nothing ever going to come out of it. Nothing good's ever going to come out of it. They're not going to fix a problem coming out of it, but it's all about either virtue signaling or grandstanding or trying to hurt the other side. There have been a lot of people that have been obsessed with a January 6th investigation, right, from Congress. Your opponent was in favor of having a January 6th commission to weaponize a day where you and I talked about this earlier. Law enforcement already started investigating that the moment it started to happen, right? They were on it immediately. And the people that were involved and did bad things on January 6th have been investigated and been held account like no one else that I've ever seen in this country when it comes to crimes that deal with politics and national security. And there's some people that say they're even in many ways being persecuted. They're not getting court dates. They're being held. They're being held for longer than any other criminals being held, waiting to even get their day in court for what happened on that day. When you look at your opponent and you know that he went along with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, all these professional liars that were the ones in favor of the Russian hoax to impeach Donald Trump not once, but twice, and he went along with it, would you have voted that way, or would you have said no to that January 6th investigation?
We have to say no. You look at it, what you said, let's expand on that a little bit. Grandmas, mothers, elderly, they didn't care. They've been just rounding up people who were there on January 6th. They don't have court dates. They've been locked up. FBI, ATF, every organization, government, local government has been investigating this and not doing anything about it. Yet, we saw Seattle burn. We saw Portland burn. When I got to Washington on January 4th, I was devastated when I went and saw BLM and Antifa written on statues that had been here since the beginning of our nation, vandalized. from the protest that
burning
happened.
of a church right across from the White House.
Yeah, that just happened weeks before. They still had the construction tapes. They had monuments torn down. Where is the investigation into that? Where was the sanction? Where was the outrage by Congress? So there's no consistency. There's no purpose. What's the reason other than mass theater? These Congress people just want to put their name on something and say, look, we're doing something. But they're doing all the wrong things. They're not making our gas prices go down. They're not making our shelves in our grocery stores fill up. They're trying to punish truckers. They're trying to punish people who were in Washington, D.C., most of which were there peacefully. Yet they're ignoring every other state, and I could have listed a whole other list of things that went on where government officials, Democrats in Congress, were marching alongside. We had Republicans, one from Utah, march with Antifa. And
meanwhile, Antifa and Black Lives Matter were chanting, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them now? Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. Death to America, they were chanting in California. And yet Nancy Pelosi knelt down in a show of we stand with them in Congress and said, this is what we are and this is what we support. The same people that burned down police stations, mom and pop businesses, minority businesses, and where people actually died. And yet no one's been held accountable for that in this country. And that happened for more than a year straight.
And the damage I saw in Washington was just the tip of the iceberg. I went and saw Seattle, where they had the autonomous zone. I saw Portland. I saw Minnesota. You know, where was the Congress people touring those and saying, let's call for action? Yeah, we're the minority group in Washington right now. So that means you can't speak out against crimes? That means you can't speak out against violence? It means you just have to go along to get along, right? This is how we do it. So yeah, I could care less if you liked or hated the former president. I could care less whether or not you wanted to investigate when the investigations were going on and waste taxpayer dollars, but be consistent. Let's look at all of the damage that was done during that political election of 2020. Let's look at all the protests. Let's look at all the murders. Let's look at all the vandalism and the buildings being burned down and mayors and governors and politicians playing along with it. But this is the insanity we have today. Media will make it look like it was a takeover, a coup that was attempted to happen. Yet that's exactly what they were calling for in these other states, and nobody did anything. There was crickets.
Let's talk about the Biden crime family for a second. We now know, I say this sarcastically, because the New York Times confirmed that the laptop is real. We know about the corruption and the payments. We know there's sources now saying that he's trying to take a plea deal to protect his father. We know there's major tax problems and that there was money given apparently directly to Joe Biden that no one paid taxes on. And even now the New York Times seems to be trying to put out some of this bad news on behalf of the White House, but spin it a little bit because they know there's a good chance that Hunter Biden's going to be indicted by this grand jury. Congress has actually refused to look into all of this treasure trove of information about hundreds of millions of dollars in loans coming from China being compromised with Ukraine, being compromised by oligarchs in Russia with direct ties to Vladimir Putin. You look at all of this information, and I have to ask myself at this point, how compromised is Joe Biden? How much is he potentially being blackmailed by Ukraine early on, by Russia, or by China? Do you think we need a special prosecutor to look into this?
We do. It's funny. We will impeach, and they've made a joke of impeachment in Washington. Let's get that clear.
It's sad because it's been used too much now that it's almost meaningless.
But where's the vote of no confidence for our president, our vice president, our Speaker of the House? Where's the investigations from the Republican side when things that the media, that everybody said the Trump supporters were crazy and believing, they were all false? Where's the apologies? Where's the research being done? Nothing. Why? They don't want it. You know, Republicans on whole just want to be looked at as the person going back there and doing one good thing. That's all they care about. If their district thinks they did one good thing, they'll get reelected. They spend most of their time trying to get reelected instead of looking at the real issues. And if we don't do something about this president, about this vice president, because the corruption wasn't just Hunter Biden. Nobody in their right mind would have looked at Hunter Biden and said, oh, I want to give him lots of money because he has zero influence. It's because who his father was. And his father got the money. We know that as fact now. And if you deny that in this country, then you're really not doing your own research and using logical thinking.
Why do you think your opponent's been so silent on it? Because it's certainly, as I did a Google search, it's very clear that he's not one out there talking about these real problems in D.C.
He's buying stocks. He doesn't have time to do what he's supposed to do and protect the people of Utah and this nation. And that sounds, critical on my part, but it's fact. The fact of the matter is, not just him, but other Republicans are out there ignoring what's going on because it's something that the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about. And if I bring up something that the mainstream media is against, then I'm not going to get airtime. And if I can't get airtime, then I'm not going to influence special interests. And if I'm not influencing special interest, I'm not going to monetize this position. That's what is cared about more in Washington, D.C. than doing what's right.
Caucuses, I think, are actually pretty cool. And you're about to go through that process where 1,000 people are, in essence, going to decide your fate, but the fate of what they're going to get in a leader in this district. What is it you want them to know about you specifically? And what is it that you want them to know that will be different if they choose to give you their vote of confidence?
There's 3 types of Congress people in Washington, D.C. There's a type that actually dig in, get to work, try and get things done, get good legislation, even though they might not get it passed. Then there's the type that are just invisible. They're the ones that are, hey, if I don't draw too much of attention to myself, I might
get reelected, right?
Yeah, I might get reelected.
Right, yeah. Over and over and over again. Yeah, there's a lot of those.
And I can stay here for 35 years, 40 years, and it's a good retirement. It's a good job, especially if I don't work very hard. And then there's the type that notice that they can monetize that position, that they can enhance their personal lifestyle. It's always interesting when I read the articles that more millionaires come out of Washington, D.C. that showed up making the average income of the people of America. They tend to, in their short
They walked in with maybe 100,000. They left with hundreds of millions or tens of millions.
Yeah, and it's easy to find.
If you don't believe me, just call Nancy Pelosi and her husband. Trust me, they know.
Or our current congressman. You can do it. I hope to be that first. I'm a man of action. I might do things that, the mainstream media is going to be opposed to, but that's the things we need to do. That's the things the people of this country want us to do. I want to be that first type of person. I want to be the one that makes the hard decisions, looks at the hard topics, the things people don't want to discuss. The legacy I want to leave behind is a legacy that we fought, the District 3, the Utah, and Americans united to fight to leave this world better for our children and our grandchildren than it is today. And we're not going to do that if we keep electing the way we do. It's sad to me that we live in a country right now where we have a Supreme Court justice that can't even define whether it's a man or a woman because she's not a biologist. But we had a president that picked her specifically because she was a woman.
Had to be. Prerequisite. Must be a woman to be my pick for the Supreme Court justice. And then that woman can't even tell you what a woman is.
She don't even know she's a woman, I guess, because there is no definition of what a woman is in her mind. So how could we have a president say we need a woman Supreme Court justice and pick a woman who can't even define what a woman is? It's just insane, and we live in this insane world. And if we're going to make any difference, it has to be now. On the radio, we've talked about it time and time again, that we're almost to the edge of the cliff or over the cliff, whatever you want to say. It has gotten worse every year. And Republicans, conservatives, true conservatives, have lost their honesty, their integrity. There's no more true conservatives.
And even their fight, I would say. I think they've lost their fight. The fact that we've allowed us to get to such an extreme point where we are debating what the definition of a man or a woman is, or that we're acting like critical race theory is acceptable to be taught in school, that and the type of people that are getting elected. I will give Democrats credit. When they go to D.C., they go to fight and they go to win, they go to take names. And Republicans seem to be just kind of laying down because they don't want to offend anybody. And if at some point you're going to have leaders that run for office that are willing to go with the same gumption, the same fight as an AOC, as a Pelosi, and actually stand up for, I would say, traditional values.
And they have to do that within adult conversations. You have to be able to go toe to toe. But the Democrats had put the fear into Republicans that, hey, if I stand up and speak, they're going to do to me what they did to Trump. They're going to vilify me. They're going to make me look bad, and it's going to hurt my feelings. You know, this isn't about feelings. This is about our country. This is about our children. This is about the people you're supposed to represent. So if we can't go back there, and we can't go back there and yell and scream and thump on the Constitution and talk about, you know, we need to restore the Constitution. We need to do it legally, intelligently, and we have to make them look like the radicals. And they'll do it if we just start the conversation. And that's the one thing that they're afraid of in Washington, D.C. Somebody that'll actually go back there and have the hard conversations and make them justify their actions and what they're fighting for. Because if people start to use their common sense in this country, it's going to become a lot better place. And they don't want it a lot better place, because if it becomes a lot better place, then their hold on power decreases and government's usefulness decreases. You know, Republicans always talk about, I want a smaller government. Well, how do you get a smaller government? You start to make government effective within smaller means. You show that it can be done. You operate it like any business, within a budget, and on time. And nobody in Washington wants to have those conversations because they're afraid of the Mark Zuckerbergs. They're afraid of the mainstream media. We can't be afraid if we want to protect freedom. And that's the problem, is we don't have people with courage to stand up. We've lost honesty. We've lost integrity. We need true conservatives once again. And that's me. I will stand up. I will fight. I will have those conversations. I've done it before. I've done it for 20 years. I've had those conversations, and I've realized at this point in my life, at my age, it's time to have them in the only place that matters, Washington, D.C.
Tim, I appreciate you sitting down with me. It's a very important caucus coming up, and I know you're looking forward to it, because really there's probably 2 dates in your mind.
Yeah, we have the battle on April 23rd, but our campaign is prepared for the war on June 28th. We're the only campaign that's going head-to-head with John Curtis. And we need the delegates. We need the people of Utah to show up on April 23rd that are delegates, unless you're, of course, more liberal or progressive and switched over from the Democratic
Then stay
side.
home, right?
Stay
Sleep
home,
in. Yeah.
sleep in, have a good day.
Drink your coffee.
We need the true conservative, the people who care about this nation, about this state, to show up on April 23rd. But then the real battle's going to start up until June 28th. We have to make a difference in order for Washington to make a difference. So I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, sir. Good luck, and I know that many delegates are going to be looking forward to a grand debate.
And I hope that the delegates that watch this will share it with their friends, because we're going to need them in the primary.
No doubt about it. Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you.